Hi, sixth graders. This is Mrs. Gall. Today I'm going to go over percents. Please grab your math notebook and open up to a fresh page. Put percents as the title of your page. When you're ready to continue the lesson, hit play. When we think about percent, we think of it as a rate of an amount per 100. So a lot of times if we were to write that percent as a fraction, we're going to see the number over 100. For example, 20% means we have 20 out of 100. Please write down that definition if you have not done so already. When you're ready, press play. The percent proportion is a very important strategy that we're going to use for this unit. A percent proportion is defined as a ratio comparing a part and a whole to a percent, like we just saw on the last slide, the number over 100. This is the percent proportion. This is very important. Please write down the definition and the percent proportion now. If you need more time, hit pause before continuing. I'm going to keep our percent proportion up in the corner for our work today because it's going to be important as far as how we set up our problems. So we always want to remember part over whole equals percent over 100. Sometimes it's helpful to say that a few times to ourselves so that we can remember it easier. Part over whole equals percent over 100. Let's write down an example. I would like you to write down this sentence just as you see it. 45 is 60% of what number? Pause if you need more time to write that now. We're going to identify the important parts of this sentence to help us figure out what the unknown is. Something I'd like you to write down next to your percent proportion is over of. We're going to connect the word is to our part. We're going to connect the word of to our whole. Now this will make a little bit more sense in a moment when we're looking at our sentence, because our sentence, we will see these words in that sentence. And so we're going to use that as an indicator of which pieces we were given and which pieces we are still missing. So is over of equals percent over 100 is another common way that we remember the percent proportion. What does that mean? Well, we have to figure out what the part is, what the whole is, and what our percent is in our sentence. Now, one of those pieces is going to be missing, so our job will then be to solve, and we'll talk through how we solve in just a moment. The first thing we need to do is identify the pieces we have. You will always have a 100 underneath your percent. That will never change because remember, percent is comparing that number out of 100, so that will always be a 100 on the percent sign on the bottom as the denominator. The first thing I like to look for in a sentence is, do we have a percent? Did they give us the percent? The percent is usually pretty easy to spot because there will be a percentage sign with it. So here we see 60%. That's going to be my number that goes in the percentage spot. So 60 over 100 is the same thing as 60%. Next, we're going to look for any other numbers that were given and which words they're nearby. 45 is. Notice that the 45 is right next to the word is. And earlier we talked about how is another word that we can use to identify the part. So we're going to place our 45, since we see the word is right with it, in our part area. So we are going to place it as the top of this fraction on this side of the equal sign. Then we see at the end of our phrase, of what? Remember we talked about the word of before. We said that's our whole. But notice how it says of what number, meaning we don't know the whole. That's our unknown. So to represent an unknown, we're going to put a variable, an x, in for our unknown. In these types of problems, you will have one piece that's unknown because our job is going to be to figure out what that missing piece is. So we're usually going to have an unknown. In this case, it was our whole. Now we figure out how to solve. In order to solve, we're going to look at the numbers that are crisscross from each other in the diagonals. I always encourage students to look for the diagonal where there's a number on each side. When I'm looking at this diagonal, I have a 45 on one side and a 100 on the other side. So this is my diagonal that has a number on each side. We're going to grab our calculators and we are going to multiply those two numbers, 45 and the number that's diagonal, 100. 45 times 100 would give us 4,500. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set it equal to the other diagonal multiplied by itself. So if I look at my other diagonal, I'm going to notice I have a 60 and an unknown, x. Okay, 60 times x, that means I'm not going to be able to figure out what that is because I don't know x. So the last thing we do to figure out what that unknown is we're going to divide by that 60. So we're going to take our 4,500 and we're going to divide it by our third number that was left over, 60. That's going to tell us what our unknown is. So I'm going to grab my calculator here, type in 4,500 divided by 60, and I find out that our unknown is 75. That means our whole is 75. 45 is 60% of 75. That makes sense. I know 60% is a little over half, and 45 would be a little bit over half of 75. Let's try some more to keep practicing this process. We want to make sure we're memorizing that part over whole, which is over of, equals percent over 100. Make sure that's in your notebook if you haven't written it there already. Okay, let's set this one up. 12 is 75% of what number? Set up our percent proportion. Remember, we always know a 100 goes underneath the percent, so I can fill that in right away. First thing I like to look for is a percent. Do you see a percent in that sentence? Yeah, we see a 75%, so we're going to place that in the percent spot above 100. Next, let's look for our is and our of. I see the number 12, and the number 12 is connected to our is. That means 12 is our part. We're going to place that on the top on this side of our proportion. That means what is missing? Our whole. Of what number? Our of is our unknown, so that's the piece we do not know. Maybe on the last slide you were a little bit confused about my setup. Here's what I'm going to encourage you to look at. Where's the diagonal that you can see a number on both sides? Well, here's my diagonal where I have a number on both sides. So we're going to multiply those two numbers. 12 times 100, that gives us 1,200. And then we're going to divide by the last number that we haven't used yet, which is 75. When I divide 1,200 by 75, you're welcome to use a calculator, I get 16. That means my missing whole, my missing of, is 16. That means 12 is 75% of 16. Does that make sense? Yes, 12 is 3/4 of the way to 16, so that answer makes sense. Let's try another example. 8 is 40% of what number? Set up your percent proportion by setting up two fraction bars equal to one another. You know which number always goes down here? Our 100. Next, I like to look for the percent. What's our percent in this sentence? 40. That's always going to go over 100, the percent is. Now let's look and see if we have an is or an of. 8 is, so that's going to go in our part. Of what number? That means our whole, our of, is missing. Look for the diagonal where you have a number on each side. That would be 8 and 100. If I multiply 8 times 100, I get 800. To figure out what x is, we divide by the last number that we have not used yet, which was 40. Okay, we could use some estimation division here. 8 divided by 4 is 2. Cross off 1 0 in each. 20 is my answer for what my whole is. Let's see if that makes sense. 8 is 40% of 20. I think that makes sense because 10 is 50% of 20, halfway, and 8 is a little bit less than that, so 40% would make sense. Let's go into some where we have some different pieces missing that we haven't gotten to practice yet. Set up your percent proportion by setting two equal signs or fraction bars equal to one another. 12 is what percent of 20? Start by placing a 100 underneath where your percent will go. Next, I like to look for the percent in my sentence. Do you see a percentage symbol? No. Guess what's missing if we don't see a percentage symbol? The percent. That's where my unknown is going to be this time. Now let's look for our is and our of. We should have both of these pieces since the percent is what we're missing. I see 12, and 12 is connected to the word is, so that's my part. I see the number 20, and 20 is connected to the word of. That's my whole. From here, I look for the diagonal where I have a number on each side. 12 and 100. If I multiply 12 times 100, I get 1,200. And then remember, the last number we have not used yet, our 20, that's what we're going to divide by to figure out what our unknown is. 1,200 divided by 20 equals 60. That means 12 is 60% of 20. Does that make sense? Yes, because 10, like we set up here, is 50% of 20, and 12 is a little bit more than 10, so it makes sense that 60 is what our percentage would be. Maybe you noticed another connection here. That 20, in order to get up to 100, we could just take that and multiply it by 5. So that means 12, in order to get it up to our unknown, we would just multiply it by 5, which would also get us 60. There are other strategies we can use that will work for some problems like this, but our cross product strategy that we've been using will work for all problems, so that's why we emphasize that strategy. We have a few left. Why don't you try this one on your own? Pause the video and press play when you're ready to hear the answer. All right, you guys, let's go through the answer. When I set this up, I set up my two fraction bars equal to one another with a 100 underneath the percent. I see that I'm missing the percent, so that's my unknown. 6 is connected to the word is. 8 is connected to the word of. That means 6 is my part, 8 is my whole. Next, I look for my numbers that are diagonal from one another, 6 and 100. If I multiply those together, I get 600. Then I divide by my last number I have not used yet, which is my 8. 600 divided by 8, you're always welcome to use a calculator for that part, would give us 75. That means 6 is 75% of 8. Last one, why don't you pause and try this one on your own? When you're ready, hit play to hear the answer. All right, let's go through the answer. Set up my percent proportion with a 100 under the percent. Look for the percent in my problem, which is 20. My other number in my problem, 15, is connected to the word is. That means 15 is a part. And my missing of what number is my whole. I solve using cross products. 100 times 15 is 1,500. divided by my last number, 20. 1,500 divided by 20 is 75. That means 15 is 20% of 75. That's all for our lesson today. If you have questions, talk with your teacher.